In Borderlands 4, you're choosing between 4 unique and more customizable than ever Vault Hunters. They have the biggest skill trees we've ever seen in the Borderlands game. In fact, each Vault Hunter has a bigger tree than 1, 2, and 3 combined. In this video, we'll be deep diving into Rafa, a man who was raised in 0G, who's strapped into an experimental TDO exosuit that can digistruct massive blades, cannons, and guns. We'll be running through his 3 action skills, how they can be modified with augments and capstones, his 3 skill trees and their skill paths, as well as all the passives and how they combo together with his kit. This is going to be a huge video, so buckle up and hopefully by the end you'll know if Rafa is the Vault Hunter for you, or you can just put it on ×2 playback speed if you just want to see the trees. First, each Vault Hunter gets a unique trait. His is called Overdrive. When he activates an action skill, he enters Overdrive mode. While active, he gets 25% increased movement speed and deals 10% increased damage. This is 10% increased damage to all his outputs, including dots, action skills, and corrosive blobs he'll fire off, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Overdrive is a lot better than it sounds. Once the action skill ends, it lingers for 12 seconds, and a lot of passives play on this mechanic by buffing Overdrive's duration and effects. His first action skill is Arc Knives. By activating it, you equip powerful arc knives that have their own set of attacks that can be modified with augments and capstones. They deal melee damage, so any melee boosting gear or passives you have will benefit this. They also mark enemies, causing them to take increased damage for every mark up to 4 marks at a 6% boost each. That's 24% bonus damage at max. This ability lasts 32 seconds total with a 48-second cooldown. When you press left click, you perform basic melee strikes. By pressing right click, you dash forward and perform a shock attack, which is great against shields. Pressing F, which is the key to activate the ability, will unleash Rafa's Blade Fury, dealing shock damage to all marked enemies and ending the skill. So you want to be sure to mark as many targets as possible. His next action skill is Peacebreaker Cannons. By activating them, you equip 2 shoulder-mounted cannons that automatically start firing at enemies in Rafa's crosshairs. They deal kinetic gun damage. If the target dies, the cannons move on to another target, or you can press the middle mouse button to change targets. Holding F ends the action skill early and refunds a portion of the time remaining into cooldown. The duration of the skill is 18 seconds with a 32-second cooldown, so Arc Knives will have a longer uptime, but Peacebreaker Cannons can be activated more often. His last action skill is Apophis Lance. By activating it, you equip an offhand arm cannon that decreases Rafa's gun handling, but allows him to fire shock ordnance blasts, meaning that any ordnance damage increasing gear or passives will benefit from this. During the 24-second duration, you can continue to fire your main hand weapon with left click, but by pressing right click, you'll fire the lance. You'll have 3 charges, at least initially. If you hold in right click, you'll consume more charges but deal more damage, increasing the projectile size and speed. Being shock, it's good at taking down shields and therefore opening fights. The cooldown is 18 seconds, which is the lowest out of the 3, so you'll be able to fire this action skill off quite often during fights. Note that while all these action skills are active, you'll have Overdrive active from Rafa's trait, so that bonus 10% damage will be applying to everything, including the gun in your main hand. So you might want to wait before firing off all 3 charges of this skill. All 3 action skills are tied to 3 different skill tree paths, with their own 3 branches. Though these trees will contain things that benefit the skills they're tied to, you can have any action skill equipped and invest in any skill tree. It actually might be part of your build to invest in multiple skill trees. So the passives are general and apply to most character builds, but the tree also contains augments and capstones that are tied to their particular action skill. They can be equipped with 1 augment and 1 capstone. The augment often modifying the skill and the capstone severely modifying the skill. But you need to unlock them in one of the 3 skill trees the action skill is tied to, and I'll go through these when they come up. The first passive of the Arc Knives tree is Handshake Deal. It flat improves your gun and melee damage. To clarify before we move on, let's say you had a point in this and then switched over to another tree and had points in the Peacebreaker Cannons tree. You'd still get the 10% increased gun damage and 35% increased melee damage with 5 ranks of the skill. The melee damage part benefits the Arc Knives directly, but you can still melee in other builds. Midnight Oil gives your action skills bonus corrosive damage, not just your knives, so you can see how your choices are actually far larger than you'd initially think because you're not locked into a single action tree, though each tier of each action tree requires you to have points invested into that tree, usually 5 for the next tier. Branches need their own investment. I digress. With this passive, the longer the action skill is active, the greater the damage. At level 5, it's 10% bonus damage per second. Naturally, this means the Arc Knife's long duration benefits it for the bonus damage. There are augments and passives coming up that boost the skill's uptime, and even some uptime boosts for other action skills in other trees. Keep an eye out for both enablers and payoffs. You can use this and charge up Rafa's Lance at the last few seconds for a massive 230% bonus corrosive damage burst. Next is Expedite. This works with his trait, which grants him overdrive when you activate his action skill. It further boosts his movement speed by 25%, which is a total of 50%. This is massive, and you'll be flying around the battlefield with your action skill active, even 12 seconds after. Unless you upgrade it, of course, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. With 5 points invested, moving on down to the next tier. Dial In makes it so whenever Rafa damages an enemy in melee, his melee attacks get increasingly higher critical chance until he crits, then his stacks are reset. At 5 points, the critical chance is 15% each hit, meaning that your 6th hit is always a crit at a minimum. This applies to your arc knives as well as your ordnance that uses melee damage, like throwing knives. Next is the first augment. You don't need to invest a point in augments, they just unlock by unlocking the tier they're placed on. Altered Cabron. Now, I'm not Spanish, so I'm going to get a lot of these names wrong, just bear with me. When Rafa kills an enemy while Arc Knives is active, meaning that yes, if they die to a dot tick or any other thing, Rafa restores a portion of his maximum health capacity. Big on its own, making the skill into an oh shit button when you're about to die. However, when Rafa gains health, you deal bonus corrosive damage with all attacks and gain increased movement speed. This stacks 25 times at a 16-second duration, getting to 375% bonus corrosive damage and 250% movement speed if you don't improve the duration. This is an insane boost. You should try to find other ways of gaining health, say lifesteal weapons, because you'd absolutely go off in fights. A rocket zooming around dealing insane damage. By the end of the duration, you're going to be absolutely unstoppable considering the passives before it and your trait. Next passive is El Corazon. It converts your max health into max shield. 10% of health is turned into 12% of shield, and with a 5-point investment, it's 50% health into 60% shield. Overall, a 10% boost to survivability if you put aside damage types. However, you might have skills and gear that benefit off a lower health pool and a high shield pool. Altered Cabron sees the previous maximum and not the modified maximum, so the health restore feels much better with this passive. The next augment is Dead Man Walking. Ironic because Rafa considers himself to be one. This modifies Arc Knife so it doesn't end unless you die and enter fight for your life, or if you activate Blade Fury, which is simply pressing the action skill again. Sorry, there is a downside though. When the duration would have been depleted, you start losing health instead. It doesn't bypass your shield, and damaging an enemy gives you overshield, so this augment is all about staying active and aggressive. If you do, his action skill will essentially last for the whole fight, completely changing your playstyle. So at this stage, you have a choice of two very powerful skill changing augments. Dead Man Walking makes it so your action skill lasts the full duration of a fight with a little risk reward element, and Altered Cabron gives you more damage and speed over time. The next passive, Diamond Hands, activates when you deal melee damage, so yes, with arc knives or throwing knives too. Each stack increases your gun damage, 10% per stack at a 5-point investment, with max stacks being 100, so if you melee your way up to 100 stacks, you'll do 1000% bonus gun damage. That's insane, but stacks decay quickly once you deal gun damage, so that will be a 1000% burst. If you plan at all to use melee attacks, this is an insane passive. The next tier requires a 10-point investment. Seldar also requires 1 point in the Dial-In passive. It makes it so Rafa's melee crits gain life steal, 5 points granting 25% steal. Huge, and also another way to keep you healthy as your health drains with Dead Man Walking. Next passive is In the Zone. It's a kill skill, meaning that it activates after you kill something. In this case, freezing your overdrive duration up to 6 seconds with a 3-point investment. So you might be able to keep your traits 25% movement speed and 10% damage up much more often, and when you consider that it can be improved with many passives such as Expedite, I can't imagine this passive ever being bad. The next passive is to the last. The lower Rafa's health is, the greater skill and gun damage bonuses he gets, up to 45% skill damage and 30% gun damage with a 5-point investment. You need a point in Corazon to get this, making it clear that the investment of the 50% max health removal is noticed by skills like this. So even when you have the maximum health you can get, you'll be treated like you only have 50%, turning on to the last and granting more health with the altered Cabron. Hard Sell is next, and it's all about shields. When they break, Rafa instantly gains a portion of his shield's max capacity as overshield. This skill then can't be used again until he next activates his action skill. It gives plus 45% overshield capacity at a 5-point investment. Now we can see how Corazon's shield maximum boosting component is used effectively. Hard Sell granting you essentially 45% more shields on top of the 60% more you get from Corazon's. If you have a build where you activate your action skill a lot, this will go a long way to keeping you tanky. I think it would actually work very well with his Apophis Lance action skill this way. Alright, now we have 3 different branches, the top tier of which requires 15 points in the tree. Blowout makes it so whenever Rafa applies the heavy arms mark or crits with his action skill, the enemy explodes in corrosive lobbed projectiles. I told you we'd get to this soon. The longer the action skill has been active, the more projectiles. More ranks means more damage. So like a lot of Rafa's passives, this benefits from a longer action skill duration. Just by investing 15 points in this tree, you unlock all 3 of the augments on this level. The first augment you unlock is Thunder Cutter. It makes it so your arc knives now deal shock melee splash damage. Also, Rafa deals 50% more increased splash damage in general, which applies to your ordnance like grenades and heavy weapons, and your splash weapons. It's not clear just from looking at the stats how big the splash effect is, but this could be okay or great depending on that answer, so test it out. Dealing shock at all times, however, makes your action skill extremely good at taking down shields. El Paragus is the next passive, and it also increases splash damage, but also splash critical chance. At 5 points, 35% more splash damage and 15% more critical chance, making you suddenly very effective with ordnance and even torque branded weapons. In the next tier we have Protecto Pulse. Pressing right click after your knives are active, or just F when another action skill is active, drains a portion of Rafa's shield to do that much shock damage to nearby enemies, up to 100% at 5 ranks. So you might consider not putting 5 points in this just for protection's sake, but once again, boosting your shields has a payoff. Also, as it's splash damage, it gets a boost from the other passives in this branch as well. Shock Marker makes it so when Rafa deals splash damage, he deals shock bonus damage based on the damage dealt, 50% at 5 points. So on a splash damage build, that's 50% more damage output. Once again, torque weapons would love the shield destroying aspect of this as well. 10 points in the branch unlocks a 1-point passive, Liquidation. It makes it so marked enemies killed by Rafa leave behind a corrosive hazard, leading into the shock and corrosive theme this branch has. Since the capstone doesn't need a point investment, this is kind of like the last skill you'll pick up in the branch, so I hope you enjoy the damage it does, because I'm sure the effect itself won't excite many people. The capstone for this branch is Hurricane is special. Activating Blade Fury causes Rafa to spin his blades, creating a singularity that draws in all marked enemies and other nearby enemies while continuously dealing shock damage. Whenever this attack kills an enemy, Overdrive grants increased action skill cooldown rate. The capstone really shows what this branch is about: splash, shock, and corrosive damage. Marking enemies is important too, because no matter their distance from you, they'll be sucked in and take the damage. Investing in the tree grants this action skill huge bonuses, like 50% bonus shock damage from Shock Market, and creating corrosive projectiles from Blowout, eating through shields and armor alike. Moving over to the middle branch, which I'm most excited to build around, we have Artilleria. It increases Rafa's ordnance cooldown rate by 55%, a huge amount, doubling the amount you can use your ordnance, which, for those who don't know, is new to Borderlands 4. Basically, your heavy weapons and grenades are moved to their own slot. Instead of having ammo, they have their own cooldown. In practice, it makes it so you can use your powerful tools much more often without feeling guilty like you're losing ammo, and this further improves that. The augment of this branch is Parting Gift. Whenever Rafa activates his dash attack, the right click attack for those paying attention, he leaves behind a grenade. If he has a grenade equipped in his ordnance slot, he uses that grenade instead. Enemies damaged by these grenades become marked. Whenever Rafa applies a mark to an enemy, apply an additional mark. You can see how this augment is leaning into an ordnance and mark playstyle. It will be as good as the grenade you have equipped, otherwise it seems like the others provide more. Keep in mind you can dash around like crazy with relatively no cooldown, so it's far better than it seems at a glance. Stop. Collaborate Ignition. This modifies your overdrive trait, so it gives bonus damage to his weapon's element with all skills and ordinances while active. At 5 ranks, 60% bonus damage. This is absolutely huge. Your ordinance now deals elemental damage and 60% more. This combos with the augment we just saw, as well as the next passive, Booming Business. Whenever Rafa critically hits an enemy, he gains a chance to spawn a free grenade. If he has one equipped, it will be a grenade based on that. Each rank decreases the cooldown time and it's a flat 50% chance. So if you're getting a lot of weak point hits, which isn't too hard, imagine Rafa spamming out boosted grenades like a madman. The next passive is Synergia. Whenever Rafa deals ordnance damage, he also deals increased gun damage and melee damage, up to 6% gun damage and 12% melee damage per stack, with each lasting 8 seconds. I don't need to explain how nutty this can get when combined with the previous passives and augment. The 1-point passive in this branch is Hemolitions. It modifies your overdrive trait. While overdrive is active, Rafa may use grenades while cooling down at the cost of health, costing exponentially more health each grenade thrown until Rafa's grenade fully cools down, starting at 10% health, so this enables you to even further spam your grenades like an even madder man, granted you have some way of healing back up. We've already seen some life steal, and the Christmas Land situation is finding a grenade that also heals you for the damage it does. The Capstone's a big one. While Arc Knives is active, Rafa's exosuit stores up damage dealt to him. The exosuit then heats up, constantly hurting him with fire damage. Additionally though, Rafa's melee attacks deal bonus fire damage. A portion of all damage dealt to Rafa is also dealt to enemies he has marked. Using Blade Fury now also makes Rafa consume all the damage stored and deals bonus fire damage based on the damage stored this way. A portion of all damage dealt this way is returned to Rafa, so basically you're storing up damage like Shaw from X-Men and then exploding like a giant grenade. Fitting of this skill branch. So you actually want to take damage, and marking enemies is important as they take fire damage when you do. A risky strategy with a huge explosive payoff that will actually get some benefit from the last skill branch's splash damage boost. This is the first case of Rafa dealing fire damage as well, but it won't be the last, as El Diabolito makes it so a portion of all fire damage Rafa deals also deals bonus fire ordnance damage, up to a huge 50% of all damage dealt, meaning boosting your ordnance will boost your fire damage, turning a build that had absolutely nothing to do with fire into an absolute incendiary damage exploding menace. Now, I don't need to explain how this branch works. It's ordnance damage, marking targets, and incendiary on the side. The last branch starts with El Borracho. Rafa deals increased corrosive damage while his action skill is active. The longer it's been active, the greater the bonus. 5% per second with a 5-point investment, which means 160% bonus corrosive damage after a full Arc Knives duration. The damage bonus won't get as high with other action skills without investment, but they would still reap the benefit. A big blast from the lance or the constant damage from your cannons, if you can add some corrosive damage in the mix, would be very effective. Keep in mind that with the Dead Man Walking augment, your knives might exceed that duration and therefore get quite nutty. This branch's augment is Acid Drop, and I think it's what they did to come up with it. The dash attack right click is replaced by Caustic Leap, which causes Rafa to leap forward and create a caustic hazard wherever he lands. Also, whenever a mark is removed from an enemy, it explodes in a corrosive nova. So Acid Drop stacks with El Borracho or Borracho in a very obvious way. Hazards are interesting because they require enemies to stay in them. I feel as though this augment will either be great for you, like against bosses who don't move around, or something you just don't enjoy. A passive that a lot of other passives enjoy, Empuje increases action skill duration by 35%. I don't need to explain to you how that improves Rafa in such an obvious way, considering other passives like El Borracho. The only reason you wouldn't consider this is if you have Dead Man Walking or are using the Lance. The next tier has something I can pronounce, Sustainable Energy, which buffs his overdrive trait. Rafa gets health regeneration based on how much overdrive time is remaining. Remember that overdrive activates when you activate your action skill and doesn't start the cooldown until after it finishes. So at a 5-point investment, you get 4% max health a second continuously until the action skill finishes, which slowly drops off after 12 seconds. So during your long Arc Knife party, especially with Dead Man Walking, you'll be shrugging off every pinprick you receive. Motiva makes it so when you right click, regardless of what you've set it to do, it grants increased overdrive duration as well. The bonus is reset when you activate an action skill, so this branch's tier works well together. 25% bonus duration doesn't sound incredible to me though for such a late passive. We're at the final capstone, Galvanic Panic. Whenever Rafa performs a melee attack while arc knives are active, fire an acid STRM glider at an enemy in view. They're basically just missiles. They deal corrosive splash damage based on the total number of marked enemies. Additionally, killing an enemy while arc knives is active restores action skill duration. Activating Blade Fury causes Rafa to fire a volley of those STRM gliders in front of him and end arc knives. So this modifies your action skill in such a way you'll need to try to understand it by really testing it out. You'll be launching off corrosive missiles at your enemies as you cut through them while getting kills, which keeps the skill going. It really does it all. Considering your corrosive damage is getting huge bonuses based on the duration of your action skill, Galvanic Panic is quite insane. The final passive in the branch is Cruel Accrual. Try to say that 5 times in a row. Rafa gains increased skill damage with all skills. The longer his action skill has been active, the greater the bonus. With a 5-point investment, it's 10% per second. So all other passives, augments, and capstones that increase the skill's duration absolutely love this. Though I really need to explain how increasing skill damage by 10% per second will get you to insane damage with any of the action skills. This seemed like one of the best passives in practice, and I don't think it's going to get a nerf. So we have a branch about splash, shock, and corrosive damage. We have one about grenades, fire damage, and explosions. We have one about corrosive damage and increasing your damage over time. But wait, we still have 2 other complete skill trees, and my god, I'm already 20 minutes into this video, I better speed it up. So next is the Peacebreaker Cannons path. These are kinetic auto-firing shoulder-mounted turrets, at least for now. The first passive is CTR, and it gives Rafa a cool 25% increased gun damage. This boost affects the cannons unsurprisingly, but also your weapons, so it's good on any build. Daft Hands is next, and for a 5-point investment, it increases your fire rate by 20% for both Rafa and his cannons, so the first 2 passives work together to make you deadlier in general. The next is Shield Burst. It buffs Rafa's overdrive trait. While overdrive is active, Rafa gets 55% increased shield recharge rate and a 60% improved shield regen delay with a 5-point investment. It's your standard press your action skill to be more tanky passive. Juega makes it so crits restore action skill duration, 15% restored per crit, and that triggers once every 4 seconds. So yes, theoretically you can keep the action skill going if you keep critting, because 4 seconds is shorter than the 15% restored. The first augment is called Instinto, and grants his Peacebreaker Cannons an increased crit chance, wouldn't you know it. Talk about combos. Also, pressing F while active causes them to double their crit chance and gain extra crit damage. This causes the action skill duration to drain faster though. But to offset that, killing an enemy in general causes Rafa to regain action skill duration while also causing it to drain faster, so every time you kill, you get increased duration, but eventually the skill duration drain will be so fast, the skill will end regardless. But this is a nice augment to push the damage and duration, especially on crit builds. Field Repairs restores a portion of max shield when you activate an action skill. If they're full, gain overshield instead. 45% with 3 points invested. Great, some tank. Boring, but very useful. The next augment is Bullet Buddy Deluxe. While the cannons are active, Rafa and his allies regenerate ammo. Don't sleep on the allies part. Rafa's cannons deal bonus fire damage based on how full his gun is, and his turret shoots exploding bullets when the magazines are full. It keeps going. Pressing F while cannons are active causes Rafa's shots to consume no ammo, but causes his action skill duration to drain faster, so that means you get the constant exploding bullets. Now, this skill works well with guns that have a huge magazine, letting you pile on explosive fire damage. However, it also works with guns that only have 1 shot or close to 1 shot, as you'll almost always be at full magazine that way. Pressing F might not make you consume ammo, but tuning your loadout for this augment would be the better approach. A very fun augment overall. I love the ones that have you building around them. Sia, or CYA, I think it's Sia, makes it so killing an enemy restores shields based on Rafa's maximum health capacity. 20% at 5 points, so El Corazon, reducing your max health to give you shields, does not combo with this. What you need is a high health capacity. Resiliencia buffs your Overdrive trait, an increase of 40% damage reduction while Overdrive is active, therefore during your action skill and 12 seconds after. 40% is massive, so ways to increase action skill duration in the last tree will work in this one. Maestro gives Rafa 20% more skill damage for a 3-point investment, and this is just a no-brainer. Vengeanza, for 1 point, whenever Rafa's shield breaks after fully recharging, you drop a free grenade of the type you have equipped. This passive is strong, but goes against the tanking up passives we've just seen. 40% resistance, for example, includes damage to shields. Keep that in mind, and look out for a shield mod that reduces its capacity. There are many that don't give you a shield and instead boost your health capacity. The next passive goes against this one too. El Valiente. Rafa deals increased damage from all sources. The fuller Rafa's shields are, the greater the bonus. While Rafa's shields are at a maximum, double the bonus. 30% with 3 points. This also seems like a great skill for only 3 points. Now we have the tree branches. Hell in a Shell augments your cannons. Pressing F while they're active causes them to fire 2 large firebombs that deal fire damage to a large area. Killing enemies reduces this skill's cooldown. Simple, a big fiery explosion that deals a lot of damage. Thankfully, activating them doesn't reduce the cooldown of the cannons themselves. Asymmetric warfare buffs all projectiles not fired from your gun by 45% with a 5-point investment. These include thrown weapons, action skill weapons, grenades, etc. Basically everything that's not coming directly out of your barrel. This has obvious synergy with your cannons, but also works with the corrosive projectiles we saw in the last tree or the Lance action skill. Overall, a great passive if you use something other than your gun. Next down is Errant Spark. All these indirect projectiles deal bonus fire damage. If it already deals fire damage, double the bonus damage. 40% with a 5-point investment is 80% if the damage is already fire, so you do want fire-based grenades, throwing knives, and STRM gliders, because 80%, yeah, a lot. Even bigger when you add lifesteal into the mix with Ardid. These indirect projectiles gain lifesteal 50%, so 50% of the damage they do, you'll be regenerating. Enemies tend to have a lot more HP than you, and you deal a lot more damage than you'll ever be able to take, so this is absolutely keeping you functionally immortal from anything that isn't outright one-tapping you. This is one of those passives that's sneaky good if you build around it, especially if you want to pick up that passive that drops a grenade when you lose your shield, as that grenade will get bonus damage from Errant Spark and a lifesteal for you with this passive. Rolling Stone is next and grants Rafa a 35% chance with a 5-point investment to bounce shots off himself while moving. Chance is doubled while sliding, so this passive encourages you to keep moving and be very active to become very tanky. Coupled with a 40% reduction in damage taken, you're going to be extremely hard to take down. The next passive, Proprietary Incendiary, changes your melee attack. You press and hold melee to lob a STRM glider at an enemy. Once it reaches its targets, it explodes and deals fire damage based on the amount of ammo in Rafa's gun when he threw it. The guy in a TDO exosuit has a TDO feeling skill, go figure. It has a cooldown but is very powerful considering that this branch is all about buffing projectiles not fired from your gun. This is one of them. Here's another, the Capstone Double Auto Shot, which turn the Peacebreaker Cannons into shotguns that deal increased damage and have increased pellet count. Additionally, the turrets gain a chance to ricochet off targets. Crits always ricocheting. I thought he was TDO, this is very Jacobs. Not much to say here, this is for you if you want to straight up increase the Peacebreaker Cannon's damage output by a large margin. It's better up close, so your movement damage mitigation pays off. The turret is buffed by non-gun based projectile passives, and the next passive further boosts it by giving him a 25% chance to ricochet. So this branch very obviously has a focus on projectiles with a splash of incendiary damage mixed in. The next branch starts off with Confetti, which is the way I want to start everything. Rafa's ordinances deal bonus damage in his current weapons element, 40% with a 5-point investment, so you may be able to tell where this is going, but you'll be misled. It seems like this branch will have a focus on ordnance, but that's the side project. The main theme here is elemental damage and spreading effects. With the Insta-Fort battle system augment, Rafa's Peacebreaker Cannons also deal ordnance damage, and Rafa deals increased ordnance damage while Peacebreaker Cannons are active. Pressing F while they're active causes them to disconnect from Rafa and become a turret companion that fires on enemies in place. Additionally, it will fire grenades at its target, copying one that Rafa has equipped. So yes, this also likes Ordnance, but the next few skills kind of branch away from that, unfortunately. But with these two, boosting your Ordnance damage will boost your action skill and vice versa. With Vitrol, the first shot from Rafa's fully loaded magazine deals 55% bonus corrosive damage with a 5-point investment. This would be strong with a powerful low magazine gun like a sniper, but I can't see this being very good with normal weapons, especially this late in the tree. The Capstone coming up spreads corrosive damage a bit better than this, and the next passive pays this off. Pain Reaction gives Rafa's weapons a chance to ricochet off enemies suffering from status effects. 15% chance per status effect, so for this to work, you need to spread out the elemental effects, though I'm not sure if the payoff is worth the investment, as we've seen ricochet effects done better in other passives. You'd need to pick up Vitrol, the Capstone, and the next passive for this payoff. Lightning Rod. While aiming with the gun, Rafa deals bonus shock damage. Each time he hits an enemy this way, deal increased bonus damage until he zooms out. 10% bonus damage and 5% additional up to 20 stacks. That's a lot of bonus damage if you can max the stacks and like aiming down sights. But this requires a large magazine and Vitrol wants a smaller one. There's a bit of counter synergy going on here without investing in other passives, but this is a way to put the shocked effect on enemies, especially with the next passive. El Alacran. Enemies damaged by his Peacebreaker Cannons have increased status effect chance, 35% with a 1-point investment, so you'll be melting and shocking your enemies to ricochet bullets off of them. I would have preferred they stuck to the Ordnance theme, as you might have guessed, but at least there are 2 more payoffs coming up, so bear with me. If you join the beam team, the Peacebreaker Cannons are replaced with shock and corrosive beams. Each beam automatically locks onto enemies in your view and may lock onto different enemies. Whenever Rafa applies a status effect, gain increased action skill damage. So this is that payoff for applying status effects, besides the dot damage of course, with the next passive will round it all out. Inspirado gives Rafa increased action skill cooldown rate and duration when he afflicts a status effect, stacks 10 times to 100% duration rate and 150% cooldown rate, meaning you'll get off your cannons more often and they will last longer. So this branch is all about spreading status effects with a minor theme in Ordnance. If you like elemental damage, this one might be for you. The final branch starts with Barrage. It boosts the Overdrive trait, giving Rafa increased splash damage while Overdrive is active, up to 50% with a 5-point investment. This combos with other parts of the branch to go up to 100%. This also combos with the Augment Unmissable Missiles. Pressing F while the Peacebreaker Cannons are active causes them to fire a volley of homing rockets at enemies in view, at the cost of action skill duration. The duration loss is only 5% of max, so it's not too bad. You can be spamming missiles out if you really like, but it will end your action skill early if you prefer getting a huge burst of damage. Since you might be ending it early, grabbing Everdrive and increasing your overdrive duration to 55% with a 5-point investment might be worth it, though an extra 6 or so seconds at a baseline doesn't seem too great to me on its own. Thankfully, it won't be on its own. You'll buff Overdrive with a passive like the next one, Devil May Care. While Overdrive is active, Rafa gains further increase to movement speed and gains health regeneration. But when it's not active, Rafa takes increased damage and gains increased action skill cooldown rate. Why the downside, you might ask? Because with a 5-point investment, you get 35% extra movement speed, 2.5% health a second, and a 30% cooldown rate. 20% extra damage isn't too bad considering you can offset it with other passives. This will get you to spamming rockets more often. Timorado further boosts your overdrive, giving you increased gun damage but decreased weapon handling. Bonus increasing the longer overdrive has been active. 5% increased damage per second and 5% decreased handling per second. This can get crazy, but it encourages you not to end the action skill early, kind of invalidating the augment of this branch. Let's just hope you can keep that 12 to 18 second overdrive duration going as long as possible to really rack up the gun damage. The action skill has a 32-second cooldown, so you need to find a way to make your overdrive last that long to lead into the next action skill. If so, you could truly break the game with the bonus damage. Losing all your weapon handling will be hilarious though, especially with the next tier single point passive. Soltado. When you kill, you double all your overdrive bonuses for 8 seconds. This seemingly doesn't stack, or it would be ridiculous. It says bonuses, but it might also double that 20% damage increase, something I couldn't test. I see all these bonuses really getting you to insane levels of damage output, especially since the Capstone, Volatile Hollow Points, replaces Rafa's cannons with rockets that deal splash damage. So the first branch had a focus on projectiles and incendiary damage, the next is all about spreading status effects with a minor theme in Ordnance, and this branch is all about buffing your overdrive trait and splash damage. Overall, this tree is very different to the Arc Knives. But we have a final tree to go, the Apophis Lance, which has you fire 3 powerful blasts from Rafa's offhand weapon while being able to fire your main one. The first passive is Rinse, giving Rafa 20% increased reload speed. I hate reload speed passive because they're always too low. If it takes a huge 2 seconds to reload, this only reduces that by 0.4 seconds. Why isn't it 50% or even 100%? It also, unlike every single other tree's opening passives, does nothing to boost your action skill. That is, until you get its connected passive. If you're not getting the connected passive, do not waste a point here. Last Jarus is better with 5 points. It regenerates 2.5% ammo a second while overdrive is active. You might even consider dumping 5 points in here if you invested in the last Peacebreaker Cannon branch, which focused on overdrive. Same with the Thrill. While overdrive is active, Rafa gets increased fire rate of 15%. When it's not, the bonus is reduced to 10%. So both passives help in letting you pump out bullets. Now we reach the next tier, and one of the only reasons to put points into Rinse. Preparado makes it so whenever you reload, you get increased action skill cooldown rate. This effect stacks up to 100 times, 20% increased cooldown rate at a 5-point investment, so after a couple of reloads, you'll have your action skill up. This is very powerful to offset how minuscule a bonus Rinse has. With a gun that has a low magazine, like a shotty, or something that empties its mag fast, like a Vladov, you could be getting your action skill off every single time you empty. I have to imagine this will be broken with the right weapons, as a 2000% cooldown rate makes it so your action skills have functionally an instant cooldown. Though I can't imagine it being good with Arc Knives, as you don't reload during the action skill, and it will lose that 8-second window you have to stack reloads. The first augment is about consuming charges. When he consumes one, he gains increased action skill cooldown rate. This bonus is reduced for every charge consumed, 25% per charge, up to 75% for the 3 charges the Lance comes with. So if you want your Lance off cooldown very often after firing, this will help alongside Preparado. Pardentro gives Rafa 2.5% health regeneration for 8 seconds after activating an action skill. They really love the 2.5% health regeneration, don't they? This works well if you're getting the action skill off cooldown fast. The next augment, Battery Subscription Service, gives the Lance an additional charge, which you might have seen coming if you noticed the charge-based passives before. When you consume 4 or more charges, gain 100% increased action skill potency for 36 seconds. I'm not sure if the 4 consumed charges will give the blast it creates increased potency, or if it's the shots after. I haven't been able to test this. Regardless, it's doubling your damage from future Lance activations at the very least, if you're getting them off often. Arriba gives 45% increased Ordnance cooldown rate for 12 seconds after Rafa kills an enemy. I love the Ordnance mechanic, and it would be hard for me to resist this and the passive it's attached to. First though is First Impression. The shots fired from a fully loaded weapon mag gains 40% increased damage, so naturally shotguns and snipers would love this. If you're all about those high magazine Vladov style weapons, this is less useful. Until you get a passive coming up, that is. El Centro buffs overdrive. While active, Rafa gains 5% increased weapon handling per second with all weapons and action skills. This continues to grow the longer overdrive has been active, and we've all seen many ways to increase that duration. Though weapon handling isn't exciting, the Lance reduces it, so this is a way to offset. With Metal Management, a single point gets you 2 seconds of no ammo consumption when you activate or re-trigger an action skill. This means those skills that proc with the first bullet of your magazine suddenly proc a lot for 2 seconds. Now those Vladov guns suddenly look a lot better, as well as those passives even in a previous tree. If you remember, there was one that gets a lot of bonus corrosive damage on the first shot. Now we get to a Bajo, which is connected to Arriba. Whenever Rafa throws a grenade, he gets increased action skill cooldown rate 35% for 12 seconds. There are many ways to buff ordnance and grenades, so this might be one irresistible choice for some builds. Spoiler, it's going to apply to the middle branch of this tree. First though, the leftmost branch has Brain Dump. It buffs Overdrive to give Rafa 25% crit chance with his guns. This includes his lance, so it is a no-brainer. The branch's Augment gives the lance critical hit chance. Whenever Rafa damages an enemy with it, he gets further crit chance. With this and the passive before, it's a 100% critical chance, meaning that the lance will do some incredible damage. Conductivo gives Rafa 10% status effect chance and 20% increased shock chance on top of that, so you'll be easily shocking targets with your shock weapons and your lance, which is automatically shock damage. El Catrin gives Rafa's action skill 30% bonus shock damage, and Rafa deals 40% increased critical damage for 3 seconds after sliding. There it is. This is a big boost, but requires you to be sliding around a lot to make use of it. So if you don't like sliding, I personally don't pick this up. For only 1 point, or makes it so whenever Rafa shocks an enemy, all shots fired at that enemy are critical hits for 2 seconds. So this is your payoff for status effect boosting, which is a lot better than the status effect payoff in the last tree. 2 seconds of crits means fast firing and slow firing weapons will be equally advantageous. The Capstone modifies the lance to be a short-range taser burst instead. Pressing and holding right-click causes Rafa to deal shock damage all around him. The longer Rafa holds the attack, the greater the damage it deals. Like you'd expect, this is a way to spread shock and therefore crit more often and reap the benefits of bonus crit damage from your other passives. Fiesta makes this even better, as when Rafa applies a status effect, his action skills consume no duration and his lance consumes no charges for 2.5 seconds. This has no cooldown, so you can continuously pump out your lance shots if you continually apply shocked. It sounds broken because there'll always be a limit to how many enemies you can apply a status to, but still, it's extremely powerful and brings the whole branch together. So to summarize, the branch is all about status effects and crits. It seems to come together beautifully. The next branch starts with Drone Defense. When Rafa activates an ordnance, as in a grenade, throwing knife or heavy weapon, you spawn STRM gliders that hover next to him. As he takes damage, transfer some of that damage to them. When one receives enough, it explodes for corrosive splash damage to nearby enemies. The branch's Augment Digistruct module makes it so whenever Rafa kills an enemy with his lance, he spawns a free grenade on that enemy, a grenade of the type you have equipped. This is yet another way to spread around the ordnance pain and will really depend on how strong your equipped grenade is, because without equipping one, the regular one is pretty average. El Soldado buffs Overdrive, giving Rafa 30% increased gun damage while it's active, doubling that while Rafa is charging up the lance. So with this branch, you'll be holding down both a left and right click, or both triggers, and dealing some insane bonus damage. The right tool gives Rafa increased ordnance damage after reloading 60% per shot, stacking 10 times to 600%. But you'll need to get a lot of reloads and find a way to generate ammo, as the stacks only last 6 seconds, and that 20% increased reload speed isn't really going to help you here. But look, 600% ordnance damage is crazy, and your grenades are going to be wiping the map, especially with all the free ones you'll be dropping. Your lance with a 600% damage boost is absolutely going to feel broken, because if you forgot, that uses ordnance damage too. Detonation furthers this game plan by placing a remote detonator on the enemy you just damaged with your action skill. It does override your ordnance button by making it detonate all remote detonators placed instead of throwing out a grenade or activating your heavy or whatever. These remote detonators gain increased damage and splash radius for every remote detonation. Think of the needler effect from Halo. So although you can't manually throw your grenades out, if you invest in this passive, you can still send them out in other ways in this tree and in some of the others. So if you like this playstyle, override it. Else, skip. If you invested in Drone Defense, you can now grab Drone Assault for 1 point. Whenever Rafa activates or re-triggers an action skill, send out one of his gliders at an enemy within his view. It explodes in a corrosive explosion equal to its remaining health. This makes it so you can send your drones out at range rather than them just exploding above your head after you take some damage, so you'll be a lot more proactive with this since it does more damage if they have more health. I like that you can make this skill more aggressive, and by firing your lance you shoot out a drone at the same time. The capstone completely changes how the lance functions. Instead of a blast, it now fires a corrosive blob that leaves a corrosive hazard and splits into smaller projectiles where it detonates, kind of like a cluster bomb. The more you charge the lance, the more splits. So this capstone is another you'll either love or hate, as it fundamentally changes how the lance functions. It works well with detonation, as the splash nature of the blob and its projectiles means more enemies hit with remote detonators. So this branch is all about explosive ordnance and corrosive damage. Once again, keep in mind your lance benefits from ordnance damage increases too. Moving over to Rafa's last branch, we have Juck. Whenever Rafa damages an enemy with a skill, he gains a stack of Juck. For every stack, he gains increased overdrive bonuses, 5% up to 100% at 20 stacks. When he loses overdrive, he loses all stacks, so naturally this is great if you plan on boosting your overdrive duration, either by having your action skill up more often, lasting longer, or boosting overdrive's duration directly. So at the 100% bonus, you get 50% movement speed and 20% increased damage. This is not a small amount. The augment of this branch is Engorged Boar. Your lance deals increased projectile size, speed, and number of chains. Chains will make sense once we reach the capstone, and I feel like this augment is only good if you have the capstone, as others simply do more. Without the chains, all it does is make the projectile faster and bigger. Visually appealing, but if you're okay at landing your shots, it really will do nothing for you. With Algoraza, overdrive gets buffed to have increased weapon handling with weapons and your action skill while active, up to 60%. This offsets the handling decrease when Lance is out, but it's hard to tell how effective it is without testing it against the current weapon you have. Mate is the next step to the Juck passive. It makes it so when you would lose the Juck stacks when overdrive ends, you instead convert them into Mate stacks. You gain action skill cooldown rate for every stack of Mate. You lose all stacks of Mate once the action skill is readied. 15% cooldown rate per stack of 20, 300% in total. So you'll be in a constant loop of activating your action skill, dealing super damage, then cooling down faster, then activating again. With the right passives and gear, you'll have close to or no downtime on your overdrive, which is good for deadline, which gives overdrive 15% increased fire rate and 25% reload speed while active. The fire rate alone is worth it considering how buffed up you can get overdrive. Next, we have the capstone of the branch, Project Gorgon. The lance is replaced with an incendiary laser that pierces enemies. Pressing and holding right click causes the laser to deal increased damage and chain to more enemies as it consumes charges. So now that augment before is pretty damn good, as the laser now pierces and chains to enemies, so the size of the projectile is valuable. This is also one of the rare ways Rafa can focus on incendiary damage. Rafa's last passive that we will talk about is fittingly called Per My Last. Whenever he deals damage with an action skill, he gains a 20% chance to deal that damage again. Oh yes, it's basically a crit that can crit. This will output some crazy DPS when you consider the things that could stack with it. So the first branch is all about status effects and crits. The second is about explosive ordnance and corrosive damage, and this one is about hitting multiple targets and boosting your damage output. The elemental themes between all three are shock, then corrosive, then incendiary. Let's compare that to the Arc Knife tree, which has a branch about splash, shock, and corrosive damage, one about grenades, fire damage and explosions, and one all about corrosive damage and increasing damage over time. The Cannon's first branch had a focus on projectiles and incendiary damage, one about spreading status effects with a minor theme in ordnance, and finally, a branch all about buffing your overdrive trait and splash damage. With all this together, Rafa seems like a very fast-paced and aggressive Vault Hunter. There are numerous ways to buff his trait, which gives movement speed and damage. It's activated by using your action skills, so he's encouraged with multiple passives to keep activating them or keep running as long as possible. He has multiple ways to increase or mitigate damage by moving or sliding, and has many ways to add elemental effects to his kit. He focuses only on grenade ordnances in some branches, but has lots of ways of hitting multiple targets no matter the investment. Boosting his speed well over double is not hard to achieve, and neither is almost permanent action skill uptime. If you like damage, zipping around, and action skills, Rafa is your man, and this is not even covering class mods and gear that can further change everything. So what do you think about Rafa? Is he going to be your main? Let me know below. I put a lot of work into this video, so if you made it this far, please consider subscribing, dropping a like, dropping a comment, it all helps me out. maybe even consider checking out my breakdown on Vex. Thank you so much for watching. For everything Borderlands 4, you're in the right place. Ciao friends.